We are here in Washington, and we're going to show you much of the beautiful area between Mount Adams and Mount St. Helens. We're going to give you a Bigfoot sighting report. We'd like to give you the reports that motivate us to come into these areas. This report had happened closer to Mount Adams. Here comes some photos of beautiful Mount Adams. It was hard for us to find some clear spots to get pictures of this gorgeous volcano. And here is the Bigfoot sighting report that brought us in the area. We're going to show you all the different places that we visited between these two volcanoes searching for Bigfoots. This happened in 2004, the main sighting. It's a couple sighting, and the wife is the one that reported it. Here we go. This is a compilation of experiences over a period of years in the same area between 1988 and 2009. The feeling of being watched, wildlife silenced, tree breaks, strong smell, numerous late-night vocalizations, rock knocking, things being thrown near our tent, and an actual daytime sighting. Some of the things I mention here I didn't know were typical when I was experiencing them, but now I do, since I've read other sightings on BFRO and other sites. She goes on, "My husband and I have been camping and caving in the Trout Lake, Washington area for about 20 years. Both very experienced in the outdoors, particularly in the Northwest. We've gone primarily to this area for caving for many years. The first encounter with something unusual was in 1988 and 89 on a caving trip in this area as we penetrated the forest, heading toward Mount Adams through some old clear cut to visit a familiar cave. Bird song of various types is always present, but as we made our way toward the tree line, the bird song and even the insect noise seemed to cease. I looked up. No indication of foul weather or damp wind indicating rain. Our group, I think there was 7 or 8 of us, were very familiar with the deep woods, and a couple noted that this was strange. For some reason, we all stopped in our tracks. Even though no one had heard anything, everyone was looking around each other and listening. Something seemed wrong. Then I had a very strong sense of being watched from further in, not too far away, but did not tell anyone else. I have a feeling that others sensed this as well, and we all pushed quickly on to get to the cave, sticking close to one another. This happened on several caving trips over the years, but not in the same location. The proximity, however, was fairly close, all within a 5-mile radius. Another camping trip around 2002, my partner and I camped alone, right next to a very seldom used forest road in the same area, east of the main forest road. We got out of our vehicle to begin setting up camp, and as we had done several times in the area, noticed an almost vomit-inducing stench. It was not the smell of something dead. It was like a combination of sun-baked garbage and feces. We decided that perhaps some local had driven back here and dumped their garbage, but then about 5 minutes later, the smell just went away. I had no idea about the smells encountered by others at this time, so I blew it off. We walked, sniffing around the area a little, and then there was nothing. So we decided to camp there anyway, thinking that something must have just carried on the wind, but it was still strange as to how strong it was. We've also heard some late-night sounds when we camped at Peterson Prairie, many times. Some dismissed them as coyotes. These sounds were like whoops, with several animals at once. I remember silently filing through the animal sounds that I've heard in the wild: elk, coyote, deer, cougar, wolf, owls, marmots, bear, human, in my mind, and came up blank. Nothing matched. Still we tried to dismiss them as coyotes and went to bed, but it was like something was making the initial sound and the coyotes were answering. Then later in 2003, another type of sound in this area made my blood turn to ice water. It was August, about 11:30 at night in Peterson. As we wanted the luxury of camping at a campsite instead of out in the woods, where there was running water and outhouses, we were dousing the fire and about ready to head to the tent. Then from the north, about a half a mile to 3/4 of a mile it seemed, there began a howl. Not a wolf or a coyote howl, but it almost reminded me of those emergency sirens you hear in the rural towns. The pitch was quite low, and then it raised to a higher tone and was held there for about 6 to 10 seconds, but is still low in tone. I thought about Pavarotti and some very skilled baritones that I had heard in concert. I came to a sickeningly horrifying conclusion that in all the years of voice I'd studied and heard, not one human had ever uttered something this tone, nor could they do it at this volume. The lungs of whatever was doing this had to be absolutely huge. And as in the forest, it echoed a lot, but it was not echoes that made it sound strange. I looked at my husband, who was also startled and looking at me, and then we looked at some of the other campers across the scrub from us. They had stood up and were motionless, looking back at us, then looking in the direction it was coming from. I asked, "What is that?" to my husband, who said he didn't know. We remained standing, and it continued for about 2 minutes, then ceased. In all the years we have camped and caved in that area, or anywhere for that matter, we have never heard anything like that. No human lungs are capable of that power. I have pretty much always been a die-hard tenter and backpacker, but that night I couldn't sleep in the tent. I was too frightened with the realization that what I had just heard was impossible. Impossible. No creature existed that could make that sound, unless, no way, no way. Then I remembered that this area had quite a few sightings of Bigfoot over the years. I just could not accept it. But I also could not sleep in the tent. So we got our bags and pads and slept in our truck that night. I barely slept, and was very glad to be leaving in the morning. I was shaking for quite a while. We went to the Mount Adams ranger station in the town that morning on the way out and asked if there were any reports of unusual animal activity the night before. The ranger looked at me like I was under the influence. I never said the words, but I knew what she was thinking. The ranger said she had not heard of any, and by the way, just what is it that I thought I heard? I never answered. The terror and curiosity sometimes goes hand in hand. We decided to go back to the area in 2004. We camped at Peterson, as there was no freaking way I was going to camp out in nowhere. Just the two of us in that area now. So we were there, visiting our favorite caves in the area, and early in the last afternoon, my husband and I decided to go cave hunting. What was I thinking? But it was broad daylight, so we trekked down a side forest road that was so overgrown with vine maple and had large tree fall in the beginning so that you couldn't drive it anymore. We bushwhacked through the grown-up vine maple in the remnants of a clear cut and split up, and had planned on coming around to meet each other, as we knew this particular forest road curved around a bit. I had enough bushwhacking after a while and decided to just meander down the forest road on some more even terrain. So I headed toward the mountain on this road, with my husband off deep in the bush on my left. I noticed how warm it was, and it was quite still. It was an uncomfortably hot day. Nothing but the sounds of my boots crunching on the packed gravel. Then I heard the gravel move behind me, probably about 20 yards. I took my time turning around, thinking that it was probably a cow, because this was an open range area, and as weird as it seems, seeing cows in the forest in the clear cut, this was not uncommon at all. It had sounded heavy. Then I felt faint, like I was going blind and seeing colors, and shot up with some hallucinogen all at once. I watched as a huge, hair-covered, dark cinnamon-colored human-like thing cleared the ditch in one stride, gliding into the tree line in one more lightning step, and then stood absolutely still. There I was, by myself, in the middle of this isolated forest road with a hairy, it seemed almost like semi-glossy fur, cinnamon-colored shoulder and arm, unhidden by the tree it was behind. The shoulder was absolutely massive, as was the arm, which was so long, and it was almost like as tall as I am. If I look, for example, at the door jamb in my office here, I'd put the shoulder height at just under the bottom of the jamb. I could see the contour of muscles under the hair and fur. It was obviously very strong. The hair fur appeared to be about 2 to 3 inches long. I couldn't see the full hand, as it was blocked by some undergrowth, and there it was, standing stock still, watching me. Did it think it was fully hidden? I've heard about people being paralyzed with fear and could never imagine that, but that's exactly what was going on. I thought I was going to die very soon. I just really had no idea what was going to happen. I was completely defenseless. I wanted to move, but couldn't. I was frozen. I thought it might chase me if I ran. I could not turn my back on it. Survival mode must have kicked in somehow, because I remember my training about bears. I began to back away very slowly and spoke very quietly, and was even tempted to leave my backpack for it. It still didn't move, and just stayed there, still as stone. I must have backed down the gravel road about 100 yards, and since there was no movement still, I decided to risk it and yell for my partner. There was no other way out of there. I yelled for help at the top of my lungs, and he answered, "Where are you?" I somewhat meekly called, "Here." I was afraid that my additional shouting might have the opposite effect on what I wanted and agitate this creature. A few minutes later, my husband came crashing through the underbrush, a look of panic on his face. He asked what was wrong, and I told him, "A bear." He looked disgusted and was angry. He asked where. I pointed, and it was gone. He asked if I had exhibited aggressive behavior. I said no, but he looked worried and started to look around, and he headed away from the area. We cut through the vine maple in the opposite direction of the encounter and hightailed it back to the car. As I thought about it afterward, I noted that there was no smell during this encounter to warn me, but there was also no wind, and that afternoon was very warm. It took me 4 years to even tell my husband what I saw. Fortunately, he's a pretty reasonable person and believes, with astonishment, what I told him. Recently, we've been listening to recordings on the web of what people think are Bigfoot, and some of them sound just like what we've both heard in the area. The combination of smells, feelings, and those sounds never fully registered as being connected until we found some Bigfoot sites on the web. We realized that what we've experienced a lot of different things in the area were likely a Sasquatch nearby over the years. In 2009, we camped in Peterson Prairie again. It was August. I had a lot of reservations about camping in a tent due to my previous encounter in the area, but I thought with all the other campers around, 6 to 7 sites occupied, and right next to the obnoxious camp host RV, there wouldn't be a chance. It was raining, which was unusual for that time of year. We pulled into the campground in the evening and set up tent in the site just north of the camp hosts. We made dinner and called it a night, with it still raining. Something woke me up at around 2:30 a.m. It was what sounded like 2 rocks being knocked together south of us, down the mostly dry creek bed. I was listening for sounds of clothing, a car, or camper doors, or even soft voices, thinking someone was up really late. After listening intently for about 5 minutes through the sounds of the light rain on the tent walls, there were no sounds of familiar human movement nearby. Then the rock knocking again, just a couple of times. I wanted to wake my husband to have him hear, but the sleeping bags make so much noise and I couldn't be sure he'd be silent when waking. I also didn't want to risk becoming an item of interest to the rock knocker. I was then shocked and terrified by what I heard next. Something whooshed nearby, and then I heard a thud on the ground. I was astonished. What can possibly be moving so fast through the air that would make a loud whooshing sound? I listened for any sound of leaf noise in case a tree limb had fallen, but no undergrowth impact noise nor leaf noise, as I've heard before when a limb falls. What could possibly be whooshing so strongly through the air that I hear it, and then I hear an impact nearby? Something was being thrown or beaten on the ground. Based on our experience in the area, I was pretty sure it was rocks or pieces of wood. But how freaking big and close did it have to be so I could hear the whoosh? That was terrifying. I was literally afraid for our lives. If one of whatever it was hit the tent, I listened for the footfalls or scrub noise to see if I could tell if something was coming closer. No footfalls, but another whoosh thud. I was out of my mind with fear, thinking that we'd be hurt or killed by an impact through the tent. How is it that I didn't hear something close by, either breathing or moving? It must have been from quite a distance. I didn't sleep the entire night. My husband woke up around dawn, and I was still wide-eyed in my bag. He asked me how long I've been awake, and I told him the entire night. I then told him what I'd heard, and he'd wished I'd woken him up, as he believes me about my encounter and actually wants to see it or hear one. I told him that I didn't want to risk becoming even more of a target by making noise during the night, so I remained still. We now have a micro camper that we're going to start using to camp boondock with us. I'll feel a little safer in it, but you never know how interesting it might look at nighttime visitor. I hope not too much so. A parabolic mic and some night vision binoculars might come with us too. Fear and curiosity, yikes. Follow-up investigator report by BFR investigator Scott Taylor will provide a link to the sighting report that they originally reported to BFRO down in the description below this video on YouTube. Here's the follow-up investigation by Scott Taylor. I interviewed this witness and her husband both over the phone and then in person. She explained all the things that have happened to them over the years that they did not realize were probably Sasquatch related. Her report speaks for itself, and there is not really much more to add except for a more detailed description of the Sasquatch that she observed. The Sasquatch was very tall, 8 feet or more. It was skinny, gangly for its height. The color was cinnamon. The hair was 2 to 3 inches long and shiny. She could observe the muscle definition in the arms. The head was conical shaped and sloped down to the shoulders, and there was no neck. The shoulders were huge. It was obviously a male. She saw it in profile, so was not able to describe its face. This area begs to be explored more when the weather improves in the spring. Right now, at the time of this publication, it is covered in snow. There are many other reports in the area. This is Kelly Shaw reporting from RMSO. We explored this area intently for about a week between Mount St. Helens and Mount Adams because of this sighting report and many, many others. Washington boasts the #1 most sighting reports in the world. It's just a great place to look for Bigfoot. And one of the shocking things that happened to us, our first night out there setting up camp near Yell Lake, we started hearing Bigfoot vocalizations about an hour before dark. At least that's what we think they may have been. These crazy vocalizations that you hear on the internet. It's just not a story. We actually recorded the vocalizations as best as we could with the shotgun mic connected to one of our cameras. I'll leave a link to that in the description of this video. I hope you guys enjoyed a Bigfoot sighting report near Mount Adams, Washington. Keep on watching. We're going to keep on squatching.